Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Glenn Fogel, who is the president and CEO of Booking.com. Glenn, nice to see you.
Well, nice to see you, Diane.
I think you are the first person I've interviewed, certainly today, who has real books behind him. So I almost want to congratulate you for that. Do you have a favorite
Well,
one?
I have a lot of favorite ones. It's like saying, what's your favorite child, right? But I am reading something right now that's really great called The Song of the Cell, which has nothing to do with business, has nothing to do with travel, has all to deal with biology and cells. And it's something, yeah, yeah, ELLS. So yeah, it's fascinating. And I almost think, gee, maybe I should have been a doctor, but then I think, nah, this is too hard.
It's like those, yeah, those great series like The Body Human or something like that. I love
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Well, look, business is good. I'm sure for I certainly we've been hearing a lot about not just revenge travel, summer travels looking good. So I almost want to start with um, what is your pain point right now? You've
Pain point is I guess it's more the what do we worry about right now? And things are much better than they were. 3 years of pandemic in the travel industry was very, very hard. So it's nice to see travel back. But of course, it's always so what's going to happen next? So now you have almost the concern of too much travel and not enough infrastructure to handle it. Last summer was very difficult for a lot of travelers because of the shortage of whether it be airlines not doing well in terms of having their pilots ready, it is airports, not enough security to get people through the lines. There was a lot of difficulty, and we really hope this summer will be better. We'll see.
Can I want to dispel some of the conventional wisdom. Like we often hear about, I used to live in Asia, and you hear about the airport infrastructure and the travel infrastructure challenges there. Um, Somewhat in the US, you're a global company. If you had to look at parts of the world that if you could give helpful hints that they should really be improving certain types of infrastructure, what would be on your list?
Well, it depends on which part of the world we want to talk about. When we talk about the US, it is disappointing when you come back from some of the newer airports, particularly in Asia, which are beautiful and able to get around quickly and all the efficiencies. And then you come back to the US and it's like, my God, this is horrible. And it's particularly disappointing given how much we have led in so many areas of technology, but they don't seem to be implemented in the airports as much. So one of the things I would say, well, let's just how about throw some bodies at it right now just to get things going. I came back from Europe last week, and I do have global entry, which is great, but they just changed the technology on it, and new machines came in, and now it's actually slower than it was before. It's like, who came up with that idea? So I would suggest the best thing that can be done is the people in charge, the people who actually make the decisions in airports, whether it be people in the federal government and security or people in the local authorities, if they would just spend some time at the airport, look at what the problems are. Yeah, put bodies to work.
Yeah, like the TSA pre-check line's often longer now than the regular ones. You're like, yeah, I'll take my shoes off. It's worth it. But
Yeah.
since we're talking about infrastructure, I've always been fascinated. I mean, first of all, we should clarify for people, Booking.com is more than just Booking.com. You've got sub brands, so let's clarify for people the full scope of Booking.com.
Sure. So the holding company is Booking Holdings. I'm president and CEO of Booking Holdings, of which Booking.com is the largest brand by far. But we also have companies that perhaps Americans are more familiar with, like Kayak or Open Table or Priceline. And if you're in Asia, you may be thinking of Agoda. Now, Booking.com is global, so that is really the flagship brand. But depending on what part of the world are, you may think of a different brand first.
So, are there parts of the portfolio that you would be rounding out? Because it sounds like you've pretty much got a full, complement of what one needs for travel. What would be some of the gaps?
Well, we think we do have what is needed for most of the needs in terms of traveling. And while we don't have a specific brand for attractions, things that you actually do when you travel, we do offer attractions under our different brands. We just don't have a separate brand for that. And we have something like rentalcars.com, but we also have within booking.com, you can get a rental car, or Priceline, you get a rental car. So I think we do a pretty good job of covering the gamut of all the things that are needed when you travel.
So any acquisition targets out there can either, weep or breathe easier depending on how they're looking at you as a potential owner. But one of the things that intrigues me about vendors, you're in this unique situation where they love you, but they kind of don't. They need you, right? So when there's a problem at a hotel, they'll say, oh, well, I'm sorry, you went through a third-party booking service. You suddenly become this anonymous other. How do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that we believe we have a pretty good relationship with our suppliers, and I don't think it's feel that they have to. Yeah, they get to decide whether they want to use us or not, and they do it because they think it's good for their business. And certainly, one of the things that we provide to particularly hoteliers is doing that customer service for them. We do it in over 40 languages. We do it 24/7. We're taking a load off of them, and many of them couldn't do it on their own. Obviously, 40 languages, that's a lot of different services you need to be able to do. One of the things that we always stress, though, is nobody has to use us. We have to provide value, and we provide value to both sides of the marketplace. It's both the hoteliers, let's say, on one side, the travelers on the other side. If we're not giving them value, both sides have a lot of choices.
Well, and one of the areas of value, of course, is data, and the breadth of data that you can bring to the table. So let's, give us some nuggets from what you're seeing from that data, that whether you think it would surprise us or at least help us see around the corner, as to some of the intriguing trends in terms of travel, consumption, whatever you want.
Well, there have been a couple things I think we've all been noticing over, and because of the pandemic, one thing is the step up in the desire to use what we call alternative accommodations. So not just hotels, but a home or perhaps an apartment or a villa. And that is something that really we saw really crank up during the pandemic because let's face it, nobody wanted to be in a crowded lobby or an elevator during the pandemic. People want to be away from other people. And that's something I think is going to continue for some time. That's a one. The other thing is people generally were thinking holidays, I get a week, maybe I get 2 weeks. Maybe once in a while I get a long weekend. Maybe it's a 3-day weekend because there's a bank holiday. The pandemic, though, and people now feeling that they can work and live in different places, this concept of leisure is become much more popular, which is people saying, Thursday, Friday, I'm going to go somewhere and then I'll have my holiday or my vacation Saturday and Sunday, but already be there and do a little bit on Thursday and Friday. But it enables people to take more time off, so to speak. Sure, they say they're working Thursday and Friday, and they're probably doing a little work Thursday and Friday, but they're also enjoying being somewhere else.
It's a cultural shift, isn't it? Because when I look at my family in Europe, they're used to taking long vacations in the summer. Do you feel like, again, because you've got global oversight, are American attitudes toward travel, would you say they're becoming closer in line to European consumers, or am I unduly stereotyping the Europeans here?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Different parts of the world, there are different cultures in terms of how much time off do you get under your contract with your employer. And certainly the US, it's less than it is in Europe. That being said, because everybody now has, not everyone, but a lot of people have more flexibility with their employer, they're able to take advantage of that flexibility by going somewhere else. And while they say they are working remotely, they're also enjoying being somewhere else. So certainly the belief that I should be entitled to work somewhere else is certainly something that I think is you're seeing in a lot of different places.
Are you yourself working differently? You must have spent a lot of time on the road prior to the pandemic. What's your own work style like?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously during the pandemic, I wasn't doing a lot of traveling, but since about, I'd say September of 2022, I've been cranking it back up, and I'm traveling pretty similar to I was pre-pandemic, but I'm a bit of an outlier on the spectrum because we're a very global company. I imagine a lot of people are still just beginning to crank up. We see, for example, international travels coming back, but it's still a couple of percentage points lower than it was in 2019. So I think that's going to continue. And again, it depends on where you are. The US has been far ahead of other places in terms of coming back from the pandemic. Asia was last and still coming back.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people obviously are waiting. We're starting to see the impact of the Chinese, you know, tourism boom, but that hasn't fully come back yet too. But that seems something to watch. Let me ask you, Glenn, about some of your, well, let me scale back a second because I'm here in New York City, and we just actually had our mayor, Eric Adams, say that, half the hotels are filled with refugees. And you don't have to get specific and granular about New York, but when you look at how some of these political issues have been playing out, let's take the US, is it impacting travel? Is it impacting, hotel availability, even things like the amount of housing stock that's being reserved now for Airbnb, not one of your brands, of course. What are you seeing there? Because it's hard to know if the rhetoric is true.
Well, there are a couple issues to unpack there. Yeah. Why don't we take the issue of the homes or apartments of being used for alternative accommodations versus long-term housing? And that is a conflict. And people in certain cities have been saying that, hey, we have an issue, a shortage of permanent housing for our residents here. And some of the stock, the inventory is being taken out for temporary housing, i.e., travelers, tourists. And people are upset about that. That's why it's important to have good regulations that all the people involved can come to a consensus. And we believe in regulations done properly is good for everybody. So we work with the municipalities, try and figure out what way can we work together to make sure you have a vibrant travel industry, that tourists are able to come to your location to help the economy, at the same time recognizing that we also have to have permanent people who live there to actually service the travelers. It's a balance, and we believe that that balance can be achieved by just thinking it through and working together.
When you look at questions of sustainability, it's remarkable the number of people I talk to who actually are factoring it into their travel plans. They're thinking about their own carbon footprint. They're thinking about the need to travel. I don't know if even what you're seeing. How do you think about that yourself in terms of what's the right amount of travel and how do we do it in a way that's sustainable, especially as more people get more income and they want to see the world?
Yeah, no, we're very proud of our position on sustainability, and I'm so thrilled. We very recently were listed in the USA Today. It's not Forbes. The USA Today did a thing of who are the climate. Yeah, right. And they looked at 2,000 American companies and said, who are the climate leaders? And we came in number 10 out of 2,000 they looked at. So I'm pretty proud of that. And the fact is, we believe that if you don't have a world, that you can go travel, our business doesn't exist. So we have a thing. We believe that, our mission is to help everyone experience the world. We got to make sure there's a world worth experiencing. And we do it in a lot of different ways. But one thing that I'm very proud of is we work together with our hoteliers. We put together a program called the Travel Sustainability Badge. So if a hotel does certain things and achieves certain things that are important in terms of being sustainable, we give them a leaf or a number of leaves, depending on how sustainable they are, so that a traveler who wants to travel sustainably will see this is a property that does things that are sustainable, and they can easily filter if they want that. That's a way to help drive people who not only want to travel sustainably, but can actually be actionable and choose properties that are sustainable.
It's true that you are as much a curator. I mean, I think people think of the online travel agencies as, the aggregator function that, if you go down far enough, you're going to hit the one-star property that nobody necessarily wants to go to. Do you kick many vendors off the platform, or say, look, you're not good enough to be on Booking.com, Priceline, Kayak, etc.? Or is it come one, come all, and
Look, our goal is providing as large a selection as possible. Obviously, it has to be a safe place, has to hit certain minimum requirements. But as a person who traveled when I was young, when I was very young, and I had no money at all, I traveled and saw the world. I was in Asia for 3 months. I went through Europe 2 different summers on my own. I traveled a lot, but I traveled really cheaply. I could not afford a 2 star, right? I was that 1 star traveler, and that's fine as long as I'm able to do it safely and I see reviews, which we do provide reviews, and those reviews are by actual travelers. Nobody can put a review in of a property unless you actually were there, thereby making sure that it's actually real and enabling a consumer to make their own choice. That's something that we believe in. Not everybody can afford going to a four-season hotel.
the term busman's holiday comes to mind. This idea, obviously, if you drive for a living, you don't necessarily want to drive during your days off. Do you talk about some of the places you've been to that hold a certain magical appeal for you, for various
Yeah.
reasons?
Yeah, your point's a good one, by the way, because sometimes when I do have some time off, and my wife says, "Hey, where do you want to go?" And I'm thinking, I think I just want to stay at home, which causes a little bit of conflict at times. But because I do travel so much, but I look back, and maybe it's just nostalgia. Maybe it's thinking when I was young and just beginning to explore the world. But I look back at what was then called Burma. Now it's Myanmar. When I look back at that in it was the mid '80s, 1980s for anybody. I remember that was magical. Very, very few tourists were there. Now, of course, they have a fully developed travel industry, which is makes it much easier, much less complex, and people can get around. But you still think when you're off that beaten path and seeing something new and different that not a lot of people have seen, that was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, and I'm sure things like the conflict in Russia, how do you handle that? When, we live in a world, obviously, where their borders do close, sanctions occasionally come in. Um, how has that impacted your own business in
Yeah.
Europe or in Russia?
Uh, It's an absolute tragedy and horrible what has happened in Ukraine. My grandfather was born in Kiev. My grandmother on the same was actually born in what is now back St. Petersburg. It was St. Petersburg where she was born, then became Leningrad. So I have family from both sides. It's so horrible. And we were a very big player in Russia. We suspended our operations in Russia upon the invasion, even though we were the biggest online travel player in Russia. In addition, we were able to help the huge number of refugees that came out of Ukraine into Eastern Europe and recognize the terrible problem that was going on there. We got together with our hotelier partners and our alternative accommodation partners, and they were willing to offer us free rooms, free or greatly reduced. A few of them couldn't afford it to be free, so that we could place refugees from Ukraine. And we were able to put up a platform. 75,000 Ukrainian refugees had a roof over their head because of the generosity of our partners and our ability to put together that platform to enable them to have a place to stay. The interesting thing, even though millions of refugees came out of Ukraine, there were no refugee camps. You look around a lot of the world, the refugee camps. There were no refugee camps. People had real places to stay.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference, doesn't it? I would be remiss, Glenn, if I didn't, because you are a leader who travels all the time, much of the time, to not get some of your own personal tips and things that you do. For example, do you ever check a bag yourself?
I haven't checked a bag in probably since I started traveling without my father and mother. Never check a bag ever. Now, it's not always that you can not check a bag because I have had some issues on some planes, etc., where you have to gate check. They gate check you because it's a smaller plane. But I have never voluntarily checked a bag. And I go skiing too, by the way. So I don't. My skis are. I rent skis. I carry my boots with me.
Really? So you have not checked a bag since you were a kid, basically.
No, never. And my kids and my wife too, they learned we don't do that.
Laundry becomes your friend, I guess, on long trips.
So again, it's easy enough. I mean, I literally, when I work out, I have two outfits to work out. I'll one in the sink after I'm done, and then the next day I have the second set, and the third day I have the first set's dry.
Now, any other tips, like when we're sitting around a dinner table, somebody says, well, by the way, I'm the CEO of Booking Holdings. What other tips do you give people to reduce the friction? Because we all know the friction. You mentioned it. We started off with that. What are
Yeah.
some of the personal things you do for yourself?
Well, you're right. There's a lot of friction, which is really unfortunate. That's why we are building what we call the connected trip to make it easier for everybody to be able to travel. It's still amazing how difficult it is and how many problems come up and then trying to fix them. And by building what we call the connected trip, we believe we will make it much easier. But some of the things that make it easier, and I'll just say the obvious ones, choose your flights in the morning. You don't want to be at the end of the day. If something gets canceled, it's not like there's going to be another flight available for you. Two, make sure you have all your documentation with you. How many people come to the airport and their tickets on their phone and their phone runs out of battery and power, and now they got an issue they got to deal with stuff. It's just simple things like that. Obviously, I believe it's worth the money to go and get things like global entry if you travel a lot. Yes, you have to spend some money, but you save in time coming back. And even things like clears away if the TSA line's long, clears available. These are things, again, my time is so valuable, and I believe a lot of other people's time is very valuable too. And you think, gee, is this a good use of money or not? And I think a lot of times, yeah, it is, because you can't buy back time.
So, anything on your radar that you would put on ours? Even think about your mission right now, especially, the wind was in your face for, the entire pandemic. Now it feels the wind is a bit at your back. What does success look like in terms of what you want to achieve that maybe you haven't yet?
Well, it's what I was just talking about, make it easier for people to travel. We really do believe this. And by trying to link together all the different aspects of travel, it's so important. I don't know if you do your own travel planning and booking, but anybody who does that knows how incredibly frustrating it is. And sometimes I'll get questions from analysts who say, why don't more people book a hotel right away after they book their flight? And I say to them, have you tried to do that yourself yet? Because by the time you actually finish getting that flight done and everything all squared away, and you press that last button where you paid and you get your confirmation, the last thing a lot of people want to do is now start looking for their hotel. What they want to do is go to the bar and get a drink because it was such a frustrating experience. And then you got to get the ground transportation. Then what are you going to do? And then if anything goes wrong, we want to link it all together to make it easy. And fortunately, I think that we are making good progress on that. And with some of the new things like generative AI, I think we're going to see some substantial progress and hopefully not too long from now.
What about loyalty? Sorry, being generous with your time. But I love loyalty programs. It may be my, not to malign my Scottish Irish blood, but it does. I've noticed that with Booking.com, for example, you're the conduit for American Airlines points. You're less focused on creating your own sort of loyalty programs. Is that by design?
Well, actually, I think we have one of the biggest loyalty programs in the world, actually, and it's called Genius. And I don't know how much you've used
I
it or
am a
not.
Booking Genius member, but it's true.
Do you know
It's
which
true.
level you are? One, two, or
I'm
three?
sure, you know what, probably not high enough to earn a conversation with the CEO, I'll tell you that. But I tend to look at airlines because I love to travel to far places with 3 children, which then points are my friend.
Yeah, so the Genius level, which we really believe is one of the best programs out there, if not the best, is giving people the opportunity to get instant reward right away. Instead of build up points or things like that, 10% off, 15%, 20% off, 25% off, things like maybe free breakfast in the morning, guaranteed late checkout for some properties, all sorts of different benefits that we're able to give to the consumer to make them want to use us. Now, the interesting thing about a lot of this is we're not paying for it. These are the properties that are providing the benefits themselves. We're working with them to make sure that they're businesses doing better by putting into these benefits to certain people who are travelers who travel a lot, and giving them the opportunity to get a reason to go to a particular hotel because they're in the Genius program is something that works for all of us. The property is happier, the traveler's happier, and we're happier.
And it makes and happy travel is definitely the goal. So Glenn, thank you so much for joining us. It's good to see you. And I look forward. Where are you off to next?
I'm off to next. I'll be in Amsterdam in a few weeks. I think in Washington next week. I have a trip with my wife is going off to Venice with my daughter. I may catch up with her. It never stops.
It never stops, and nor should it. Life's a journey. So thank you for joining us, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Well, thank you very much and have fun traveling.